Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning to all of you loyal listeners of the Street 919 FM. Thank you for choosing the Street as your frequency of choice this Sunday morning. As we head up to, as we complete the rest of the morning drive time, heading up to 1 o'clock. So you're tuned into Cooking with Dominic, Romaine live, and of course I am your host, Dominic. So let me say good morning, as usual, to all of you loyal listeners of the Street 919 FM. Good morning to Mr. and Mrs. Giuseppe, Mr. and Mrs. Regis. Good morning to Mother Tunapuna. Morning, Angie. Morning to Tavia Andrews. Good morning to Patsy Edwards, Nicole Caesar, to all of the Allisons, Allison Haynes, Allison Braffett, Allison Samuel. Morning to Louise Matura, my good friend. Morning, Mano. P&M Gemma, good morning to you too, as well. So, I see that the social media platforms are up. Good morning to Carol Myers, Jennifer Dorset, good morning. To Catherine Reyes, Nigel O'Connor, morning Nigel, morning to Marissa as well. To the folks who are just joining us, to Alison Boyce, we have another Alison, Philomena Collins, good morning, Gail Lawrence. Morning to you guys as you hop on to the live. So I think the YouTube should be up as well. Just give me 1 second. What is making that noise? Alright, something is making a strange noise there. That's a bit annoying, but anyway, let's get on with it. Junior Edwards, Lennox McEwen, Ghetto Gonda, good morning to all of you guys. Matt Ramnat, good morning. Right, it is now 11:15 on this second day of October 2022. How time flies, and we are in the last quarter of 2022, and the year is almost done, right? So we are almost into the Christmas season full swing. So before I begin this morning, just two things I wanted to touch on quickly, right? One, I heard a lot of rubbish yesterday from that particular program, right? Just too much to digest. But just one or two things I just wanted to address with respect to that. And for the sake of the preserving the radio station, I heard a list read out yesterday of companies that are supposedly, allegedly owned by the Ansa Makal Group, companies that are owned by Christian Mute and the Mute folks, companies that are supposed to be owned by the Aboud family and so on. And I mean, this list was read out, and I can't believe that people who come every Saturday to say we come in to educate and inform don't know, would read out a list and posit that this list is absolutely genuine and not know that you're talking trash. Case in point, everybody and the dog supposed to know that the Massey stores, formerly Hilo, is not owned by the Ansa Makal Group. Massey Stores falls under the Massey Group, which is a conglomerate just like the Ansa Makal Group and is traded on the stock exchange just like the Ansa Makal Group. JTA Supermarkets is not owned by the Ansa Makal Group. JTA Supermarkets is owned by the Alam family. So apparently somebody needs to send a memo to the Alam family and let them know that their chain of supermarkets is owned by the Ansa Makal Group. Ansa Makal does not own Rituals Coffee House. Ritual Coffee House is owned by one Mario Sabga Aboud, who is a cousin also to the Sabgas of the Ansa Makal Group. But Ansa Makal does not own Rituals Coffee House. And there were a number of other companies that I heard listed. You see, when people have time on their hands to sit down and populate trash and then circulate it on social media, and people who don't know anyway, who's supposed to be in the know, who are coming every week to educate and inform and don't know that Linda's Bakery is not owned by Mute. Linda's Bakery is owned by Peter George, who owns Trotters. But you don't know these things, and you come and you read out this list. And why I took issue with it is because when I was reading some of the comments after this ridiculous list was read out, you have people in the comments, again, who just as dumb as them, saying, well, I'm not shopping here again, and I'm not buying nothing from there again. And you see me? Why? Because you have an issue with the so-called 1%. So you decide, because you didn't know that these people that own this, supposedly, which they don't, But you so believe in what these two guys have to say, who clearly do absolutely no research whatsoever, and come on the radio every Saturday and talk nonsense. And you vex and you decide you're not supporting these institutions because these men tell you that the 1% own it. Right? Now that puts the radio station in jeopardy. Because when you come and you read such nonsense, and you have people making statements like that, and then they go and meet the hey, you know, Answer Makal and Sabgan them own Massey. You didn't know that? No. Where you hear that? I hear that on the radio, thing and them say that. Oh, so well, I ain't shopping there neither. And word of mouth spread, and before you know it, people want to boycott. It puts the radio station in jeopardy. Because you come in here to read out nonsense, and then the radio station could get sued for putting out information that is could cause a run on these people's companies. Oh God, do all your research before you come and talk nonsense now. But every week you come in to educate and inform. Inform and educate your damn self before anyway. Enough of that. Right? I just thought I would mention that. Thing two, I wanted to touch on. My friend from New Jersey, you're a wicked man. You are a wicked, wicked man. How you could do Karen Nunes to share that? You do your whole week, last week, you calling every program on this station to defend Karen and talk about, oh, the PNM, and you want to tell the PNM to stop the red tricks and this thing about, what is it, insider trading and these claims about Karen Nunes Teixeira. So you appointed yourself Karen Nunes Teixeira's de facto defender. And then you go and do an interview with the woman and get her to say that she going to challenge Dr. Rowley for the leadership of the PNM, and you post up that on Facebook for all and sundry to see, for the woman to be ridiculed. You know what that's like? That's like a fella, he know that his partner is, I don't want to say, what's a good term I want to use, boy? Facially challenged, right? And he wanna track this girl that he has absolutely no chance with, right? Not a snowball chance in hell. And your partner come and tell you, boy, I'm going to pelt a tackle behind that girl. And here you, knowing the man don't have a chance, say, boy, go through, boy. Press, go through, you'll get through. You feel so, boy, you feel you'll get through? I'm telling you, go through, you'll get through. Chain up thing. So you chain up Karen Nunes Teixeira to come on publicly and state that she is going to challenge for the leadership of the PNM after she has had nothing good to say about the leadership of this party for the last 10 years and more, since Dr. Rowley became leader of the PNM, criticizing everything that this government has done for the past 7 years. Every step of the way, any chance she get. And you really feel that she have a snowball chance in hell to win leadership of the PNM? And you post up that? Well, look, blows she going and get this week. But you're a wicked man by Wall Street. I just thought I'd show that and say you're real wicked. Anyway, good morning, Anne-Marie Monty, Diane Mohammed, Janice Matthews, and yeah, morning to you guys. Nah, boy, I can't believe you're doing the woman now. But anyway, I know that could be the talk this week. Good morning to Mr. Chance as well. I saw Mr. Chance commented on that post. But I know you do that for views, eh? You did that because that's probably the most views WZYE or whatever it is ever get. But anyway, folks, on to the topic. The issue of the fuel subsidy. Since the budget was read last Monday, right, there has been no end of talk with respect to this fuel subsidy and how the government wicked and the evil, and the UNC, of course, pounced on that. And in the response from the leader or the ringleader of the opposition, so she led off the pack on Friday with this talk about they're so concerned about the poor and the vulnerable in society. Yes. Every time one of them gets up, well, the first thing they have to do as usual is to pay obeisance to Mrs. Prasad Bisasa. The only thing they didn't do was to go down on both knees and genuflect. But I really suspect that some of them wanted to do that. So the first thing you open your contribution by praising her for such an erudite and succinct presentation, which I noticed she seemed to be she wasn't as her usual firebrand self in reading this, her response to the budget. And I believe she was probably very calculated and measured, and she took her time because she don't want to end up being another Facebook meme where when she is trying too hard, you know, she mispronounces words a lot. So she took her time to make sure she pronounced words a little better. There were a few mistakes here and there, but we saw some improvement, right? So maybe we will be seeing that a little more often now because she don't want to be the joke, the stock joke of the week on social media. And I'm sure when she makes these mistakes and these memes come out, she sees it. Yeah? So like somebody tell her, here what, take it down, be a little more measured in your reading, take your time and try and pronounce the words. Read the whole speech 3-4 times before you go to the parliament. Any words that you know you're having difficulty in pronouncing, try and practice it. Yeah, so we saw that. So kudos to her and whoever gave her that advice. Yeah? So, and one more thing too. I want to make a special appeal to some of our government ministers. You all need to be a little more calculated and circumspect in some of the things that you're saying, right? Because we have a highly charged population right now, misguided in some extent, and you have a media that seems to be very anti-government. And anything that you all say that they could misconstrue and make it seem or sound as if it is that the government is being heartless and cruel and couldn't care a damn about the poor people, going to make the front page. As we see today with the Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South, Keith Scotland. As we saw they did with Shamfa Kojo, as we've seen in the past that they've done with Donna Cox. So you all need to be a little more careful in the things that you say, even though you may mean well and you don't mean any sort of ill will or ill intent. We have a very good media. Remember, these are citizens of the country too who vex with the government for the increase in the price of fuel, and therefore they will use any opportunity to couch what you say in a certain way to get people upset. But anyway, I digress, and we move on. For yet another week, I have to start off with the saying, if hypocrisy was a party, it would be the United National Congress. Yeah, for yet another week, I'm forced to say that. Because to hear them, one after the next get up, to chastise the government and listening to some of these people and the conversation that has dominated the public space for the last few days, you would swear that the only thing Colin Byrd said in the budget was the price of fuel was going to raise. So he just came in, Madam Speaker, I would like to announce an increase in the price of fuel. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and that was the end of the budget. He said nothing else. He made no other announcements. He didn't, right. That's the impression one would get, because that is all people talking about. But anyway, I raised the issue of the hypocrisy of UNC for yet another time. Let me just give you some of the views of some of the noted economists in Trinidad and Tobago and what their positions have been with respect to the public outcry over the increase in the price of fuel. Dr. Marlene Atz, economist, 29th of September 2022. She says, I think our country and its citizens need to understand what constitutes TNT's wealth. It is incumbent on us as a department to help with that conversation in terms of educating the population. So when budget day happens, people have a better platform in which they would be able to receive the information and have some kind of understanding of what is happening in the country. Dr. Dave Siratan, economist, the problem with the fuel subsidy is that it is not sustainable in the long term. If you didn't have the subsidies, you would have been able to do what Barbados is doing and offer assistance to people to meet their fuel and food bills. But we have subsidies in place already. Dr. Marlene Atz again, we as economists understand there were certain measures that had to take place for us to try to get the economy back on some stabilized footing. Dr. Darren Conrad, so let's say the government plays the devil's advocate and says, okay, we'll give you 19% wage increase, but we will take away all the subsidies. Where does that leave the household? So we need to consider what we are asking for and what is sustainable. Dr. Dave Siratan again, we are borrowing money after all to pay public servant salaries. We have to wean ourselves off these subsidies while protecting the most vulnerable. Dr. Siratan again, if you had been looking at what the minister has been doing over a period of time, he has consistently scaled back the fuel subsidy, and I believe any Minister of Finance finding himself in the position that he did prior to 2022 would have done the same thing. Coming to that just now. Dr. Darren Conrad, in some countries with less resources available, there is a different mindset altogether. They are able to make tough decisions and implement some of these measures. But it doesn't fly here because we have become, for want of a better word, spoilt over the years. It's not Colin Byrd saying that, That's Dr. Darren Conrad, economist. Dr. Marlene Atz, what has happened for us for 60 years is that successive governments have created a dependency syndrome, right? Those are noted economists whose opinions are sought from time to time with respect to what's happening with the budget and so on, right? So I just thought I would mention that. Right. So moving right along. So the UNC is telling us now that the government is wicked and nasty and evil for implementing this increase in the price of fuel. Now, some people have said to me, don't say the government increased the price of fuel. Say that the government has reduced the subsidy. Yeah, 6 or 1/2 a dozen of the next. A rose by any other name is still a rose, right? Let me go back in time for a little bit for you guys. Again, to demonstrate the hypocrisy of the UNC. I'm reading here from an article dated, just now, let me make sure I get it. Right. Let me give it just a second to come up here. Right. This is an article dated Wednesday, February 6th, 2013. Let me repeat that date. Wednesday, February 6th, 2013, Trinidad and Tobago Guardian. And the title of the article is Now the Time to Cut the Fuel Subsidy? I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to quote something that I found to be most interesting. Yeah? In tabling the 2013 finance bill in the Senate 2 weeks ago, Finance Minister Larry Hawaii said he was seeking the Senate's approval to supplement the 2012 budget by adding $1.56 billion to fund urgent and critical recurrent expenditure to the September 30th, 2012 budget. He also sought the Senate's approval to vary the 2012 budget by $2 billion. As a result of these additions and changes that are the purpose of this legislation, the minister said that the 2012 fiscal deficit was $3.1 billion or 2.02% of GDP, compared with the original budget and projected a deficit of $7.6 billion or 4.5% of GDP. The minister then said, and it is important that he be quoted at length. I'm not going to read everything as I said. Honorable senators may recall that at the time of the presentation of the 2012 budget in October 2011, the oil revenue was projected using an oil price of US $75 and gas price of $2.75 per MMCF. Based on these assumptions, among others, the total revenue projected for fiscal 2012 was $46.9 billion. Correspondingly, the forecast for expenditure was $54.6 billion, resulting in an anticipated deficit of $7.6 billion for fiscal 2012. In September 2012, at the time of preparation of the 2013 budget, a final projection for fiscal 2012 was prepared for inclusion in the draft estimates of 2013. The revised revenue projection was $47.7 billion and a revised expenditure at $54.4 billion, yielding an anticipated deficit of $6.6 billion. Mr. Hawaii said the increased total revenue picture was due to the government receiving $1.7 billion more from energy companies than originally anticipated, and this was primarily because actual oil and gas prices were higher than those assumed for the last quarter of fiscal 2012, similar to the situation that currently prevails today. All right? Let me get to the kicker. He says while much of the deficit was a result of factors outside of the control of Trinidad and Tobago, such as higher oil and natural gas prices than projected and lower interest payments on floating rate bonds, the fact that the government was able to reduce the fiscal deficit from 4.5% to 2.02% of GDP is an outstanding achievement at a time when governments around the world are getting into trouble for higher deficits than budgeted. Let me repeat that last part. He said that the fact that the fiscal deficit was reduced from 4.5%, the projected, to 2.02% of GDP is an outstanding achievement at a time when governments around the world are getting into trouble for higher deficits than budgeted. This government had projected a deficit of $9 billion for fiscal 2021-2022. The realized deficit turned out to be just over $1 billion. Yeah? Not the 9 that was originally projected. And remember when it is that the minister had made that announcement last year when he read the budget, that they're looking at a deficit of $9 million. During the budget debate in the Senate, Wademark get up and say, they lie. He's saying it's $9 billion, but based on our maths and based on our calculations, the deficit is going to be closer to $16 billion, Madam President. Y'all remember that? That's what the UNC tell you, the deficit was going to be $16 billion. So when they come now to tell you today that the country is on the brink and the economy is in collapse and free fall, ask them where they get the data from. He predicted 16. Iwer told you 9 billion. We got an $8 billion windfall, and the actual deficit turned out to be 1-point-something billion. I'm waiting for when this debate comes. Let me see if Wademark going to get up and tell all you that the deficit wasn't 1-point-something billion, but as he said, it was supposed to be 7 billion more, so it was really 8 billion. But anyway, right. It may be argued that higher revenue than anticipated and lower expenditure than planned makes this the right time for the government to implement the necessary measures. Listen to this, sir. I want you all to listen to this. This is Larry Hawaii speaking here. You all remember who Larry Hawaii was? Larry Hawaii was the man that Kamla Prasad Bisesa, as Prime Minister, invited to become her Minister of Finance after she found that she was getting too much pushback from the first Minister of Finance under the PP government, Mr. Winston Dukaran. I was looking the other night at a program on the Parliament channel where they did, a series on Winston Dukaran, and he was talking about, some of the challenges that he would have encountered when he was Minister of Finance, some of the things, the measures that he disagreed with, and the rest of the cabinet didn't support him, and so on. And we saw that he only served as Minister of Finance for just about a year and something, and then he was replaced. But let us not forget, what I'm reading here is from Larry Hawaii, the man that Kamla Prasad Bisesa's administration that so cares about the poor, paid $11.1 million. Let me repeat that. $11.1 million of the best your taxpayers' dollars to become Minister of Finance. Most people trip over themselves just to get a work to serve on a board, just to serve on a state board, right? People would kill to get that opportunity. But they had to pay a man $11.1 million taxpayers' dollars to become Minister of Finance. And then when he became Minister of Finance, he was still receiving a salary as the minister. Despite the fact that the cock and bull that they told us was that, well, we had to pay him $11.1 million because if he had remained as the CEO of FCB until his retirement, he would have made that money. Subsequent to that, the chairman of FCB, who was then Nairi Alfonso, who herself got caught up in an entanglement with the Superfast Galicia, and so, but as I talk for next time. When she was interviewed by The Guardian, she said, well, that wasn't really the amount he was entitled to, but we decided to give him that amount because of all the years that he gave to FCB, and we wanted to offer something that would be attractive to other persons of his ilk to come and work for FCB. So we gave him $11.1 million taxpayers' dollars so he could leave the work as the CEO of FCB and become the Minister of Finance. Now, if you tell me he would have made that money if he had stayed there, then and he became Minister of Finance, then fine. Do the math and say, well, all right. If he was going to make 11.1 or 10 million or whatever, if he had stayed there, and now he is becoming the Minister of Finance and he's going to be earning a salary of $40-something thousand a month plus whatever perks and other things that he's going to get, minus what he's going to earn as Minister of Finance from what he would have lost out on, and give him the difference. But they gave him 11.1 million. But when it is now, you have the government saying we want to spend $7 million to upgrade our Arapita Avenue, and we want to put solar lights, and we want to put toilets and other things. Everybody in the UNC now could tell you that money is a waste of money. They want to tell you everything else that you could spend that $7 million on, but they had no problem with Larry Hawaii being paid $11.1 million to become the Minister of Finance. Listen to the advice that the $11.1 million Minister of Finance had to say with respect to subsidies in 2013 when he was the minister. He says, it may be argued that higher revenue than anticipated and lower expenditure than planned makes this the right time for the government to implement the necessary measures to what? Eliminate budget deficits from TNT's financial lexicon. Here the kicker. There are two measures that can be implemented almost immediately that will ensure the country would be able to balance its expenditure and revenue in the foreseeable future. The foreseeable future, not just 2014 or 2015, but from 2013 going forward. What was the $11.1 million Minister of Finance advocating? Two measures, as he says, that will enable the country to balance its expenditure and revenue in the foreseeable future. The two measures are, one, the elimination of fuel subsidies, and two, the introduction of the property tax regime. This is Larry Hawaii, the Minister of Finance, speaking in 2013 in the Senate as he was begging to increase the budget by a further $2 billion. He goes on, the elimination of the fuel subsidies will cut billions from TNT's annual expenditure, while the introduction of a property tax regime will add billions in revenue to the country's coffers. This is Larry Hawaii, the Minister of Finance, that Kamla Prasad Bisesa, appointed in 2012 at a cost of $11.1 million to you, the taxpayer. I need to keep stressing on that $11.1 million, you see? Because especially for the members of the literati listening, who know today what money could spend on and what it shouldn't be spent on. But back then, and all you don't like to go back, you all didn't know what that $11.1 million could have spent on. So when Dr. Rowley says, there is nothing wrong with the rich getting richer, but the poor must come out of poverty. The only part all you hear is nothing wrong with the rich getting richer. So apparently then, that statement had merit, because there was nothing wrong with Kamla Prasad Bisesa making Larry Hawaii an overnight millionaire with $11.1 million, and then he come and earning his salary plus perks as Minister of Finance. Nothing was wrong with rich getting richer then. And all you didn't have an issue with that. But today, Dr. Rowley make the statement, nothing wrong with the rich getting richer. Right? Because the rich gone into business to do, that's the purpose they went into business for, to get rich. And so therefore they will do what they need to do to get rich. If you who are poor choose that you want to remain poor and you want to depend on the government and remain poor, and that's the legacy you want to leave for your children, that's your business. But the rich making sure they put things in place so that they leave in legacies for their children and their children and generations to come. Yeah? But I continue. Yeah, how much money they spent on subsidy in 2012. On the issue of fuel subsidies, Mr. Hawaii allocated $4.45 billion of the country's total expenditure to fund the 2013 shortfall in the subsidy, sale of petroleum products. $4.45 billion in 2012. He went on further, right, to speak and to tell you why you needed to remove the fuel subsidy. Here it is. He says what that means is that the allocation for the fuel subsidy in the current fiscal year exceeds the total budget deficit for the last fiscal year. You hear that? The amount of money that they allocated for fuel subsidies in 2012 was more than the total deficit for the entire budget for the previous year. But he didn't stop there. He goes on to say, it also means that the government is spending more money subsidizing petroleum products than it is funding the Ministry of Education, which in 2012 got an allocation of $4.28 billion. We're spending more on the fuel subsidy than the Ministry of Health, which is due to receive $4.36 billion. So in 2012, the People's Partnership spent more money on the fuel subsidy than they allocated to the entire health sector. They spent more money on the fuel subsidy than they allocated to the entire education sector. $4.45 billion. So the fuel subsidy, in a sense, was a whole ministry by itself. They allocated more money to fuel subsidy than they allocated to agriculture, which today all of a sudden they so care about. They so care about that. And this government, $1.3 billion, that is not enough, and they don't care about agriculture. But it's the same amount of money all they allocated in that same year. But $4.45 billion you all allocated for fuel subsidy. Yeah? So when you want to talk about how money could have spent, just imagine that. Agriculture got less than the subsidy. Health got less than the subsidy. Education got less than the fuel subsidy. $4.45 billion. You know what that money could have spent on? But because they so wanted to encourage a culture of dependency and the habit of kicking the ball down the road, they knew the subsidy needed to be removed. But we can't do that. How we could do that? The population ain't going to like we and we going to lose the election. But that didn't stop Larry Hawaii, the man who they pay $11.1 million to become minister, from increasing the price of premium from $4 to $5.75. And I saw one person, I think it was David Lee. You know, when you say a thing and you realize what it is that you're saying, and afterwards is a oh shucks. You have aha moments and you have oh shucks moments. That was a oh shucks moment yesterday. So he said, in 7 years, call me but increase the price of premium by $2. It took him but 7 years to do that. How many years it took Kamla Prasad Bisesa and Larry Hawaii? How many years after they came into office did it take for them to increase the price of premium from $4 to $5.75? 2 years. They came in 2010 and in 2012 they increased it. And as I always say, Hawaii didn't give all you in increments, you know. He said take that up all your K-packs with no grease, and then he opened the umbrella and say hold that. One shot. All who complaining now about the government wicked, all you didn't say Hawaii was wicked then. He wasn't wicked. Kamla wasn't wicked then. Here it is that you have this man telling all you, we need two things we need to do. Two, just two, to ensure a balanced budget, no deficit. right? No debt. Two things. Elimination of the fuel subsidy and the implementation of the property tax regime. That's what he's telling all there, right? Notice, he didn't say, and here the word he used, elimination. Well, you know what that means? Well, for the members of the illiterati, well, I can't give all a tutorial on how to use a dictionary this morning. So if you know you have problems with that, see if you could ask somebody in the house who could, or go across the road and ask the neighbor. Preferably look for the PNM neighbor, because they would be able to help you, right? Elimination means to get rid of it altogether, totally. The government must not pay one dime, not 1 cent near farthing on subsidy. That is what the $11.1 million man just said there. Elimination of the fuel subsidy. This administration saying we must reduce, we must cap. They're not saying eliminate. They're not saying eradicate. They're not saying get rid of it altogether. They're saying we know we need to maintain a level of subsidy with respect to the fuel, the price of fuel. So we will reduce it and we will cap it at $1 billion. So as far as the PNM is concerned, we will always maintain a subsidy, but we need to set a benchmark because we cannot have this thing running out of control. But how under Kamala, telling you eliminate, get rid of it altogether on diesel, on premium, on super, on regular that they had last time. That's what he said, get rid of it altogether. But all it wasn't costing he. All of you all from the UNC who want to cost him, but no, all it wasn't costing the $11.1 million man when he made that statement. I go further, right? Let me read something else for you all. The IMF in 2016 did a report on subsidies in Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Let me read some of what that report said with respect to subsidies, right? Hold on your horses. Let me get here. Right. Fiscal implication. Fuel subsidies have imposed a significant fiscal cost. This is the IMF, right? Given the burden sharing mechanism laid out to cover subsidy payments, an increasing share of fuel subsidies has been financed by the government in recent years, whereas the PPL has covered less than 20% during the past 5 years, right? Let me see what, you see, I don't want to misquote. So what is the definition of the PPL here? Let me see if and it's not people partnership, eh? No, someone are thinking that. Right, the Petroleum Production Levy. That's what it is, the Petroleum Production Levy. Here this part, right? Because I heard the goodly lady in her response to the budget Friday say that if her administration comes back into office, they're going to reopen the refinery. Yeah, I've had to take a little bit of all your calling time today, folks. All you had to excuse me. As I say, sometimes the Sunday just ain't enough. She planned to reopen the refinery. How? How you plan to do that? And it will run properly. Well, I will explain that to all you just now. Let me continue. Point number 12 in the IMF report. It says at times, and listen to this carefully, the government had difficulty covering the subsidy through revenues and thus financed it in part by running arrears to the national oil company Petrotrin. The level of arrears peaked at $7.1 billion, or 4.3% of GDP by the end of 2012. And as a result, Petrotrin withheld tax payments to the government until the bulk of the subsidy arrears was cleared subsequently in subsequent years through budget provisions. So they so wanted to maintain subsidy, this great subsidy, that they couldn't sustain it through the budget. They didn't have enough revenue coming in. So what were they doing? They were withholding payments to Petrotrin, squeezing Petrotrin cojones, right? Contributing to what eventually led to the government of the day having to do in 2018. So when they come and tell you Petrotrin was making so much money and Petrotrin was never a drain on the treasury and Petrotrin this and Petrotrin that, here it is that the IMF in 2016 is telling you that the level of arrears, that at times the government had difficulty covering the subsidy through revenues and thus financed it in part by running arrears to the national oil company Petrotrin, and this level of arrears peaked at $7.1 billion in 2012. So Petrotrin was holding tax dollars ransom until the government of the day, the People's Partnership, that so loves subsidies, paid the bill. Now, the fact of the matter is, perhaps the amount of taxes that Petrotrin was owing may not have been sufficient to cover the revenues that was owed to them by the government for subsidies, resulting again in cash flow issues and Petrotrin ending up in the situation in which it was in. But they don't talk that talk, but the IMF just tell you that. I continue. The government's efforts to phase out the fuel subsidies are in line with its broader strategy for managing public finances. In fact, fuel subsidies work in contradiction to one of the pillars of the government's long-term fiscal strategy, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Because while the HSF is aimed at strengthening fiscal discipline, saving for future generations, and stabilizing the economic impact of commodity price volatility, the fuel subsidy does the opposite, weakening fiscal discipline and providing a strong inducement to consume the country's resource endowment now rather than save it for future generations. They go on to say, listen to this, who benefits from the energy subsidies? Here it is. Here it is, because this government does only do budgets for the wealthy, the rich. While there is a broad agreement that subsidies to households have risen significantly during the past decades, particularly between 2009 and 2014, it is difficult to reconcile quantitative difference in estimates. This is due to, the studies find that the total fuel subsidy has a very regressive impact. Cotton Cox and Ramratan calculated that in 2008 it was worth $492 million annually, annually for households in the lowest income group, but $9,436 annually for households in the highest income group. Chester 2015 estimated that the total subsidy benefited to about $12,000 a year for households in the lowest income group and about $24,000 a year for those in the highest income group. Who benefiting from the subsidy the most? So basically what this IMF report is telling you, that the highest income household benefit at least double the amount that the lower income households benefit from the subsidy. So when they want to talk about the government, this was a budget for the rich, and this is a budget for the 1%. Here it is. The IMF is telling you in 2016, the IMF is telling you that the rich household, the 1% households and the 9% households benefit more from the fuel subsidy than the poor man who went to stand up and protest outside the parliament and calling for Dr. Rowley to be assassinated. I don't know, Google might play that for you tomorrow. I don't have the time to play it today. Yes, some clown, another LBA, right? Talking about the government and Dr. Rowley's nasty thing and who should be assassinated and all that. But that's a talk for another day. Because I see the ads coming up just now. So let me continue. It goes on to say, there is strong evidence that fuel subsidies on private transportation disproportionately benefit rich people. According to the CSSP, in 2014, the low-income group, accounting for 50% of the population, gained only 27% of total fuel subsidies, compared to 36% for the richest 15% of all